All right, welcome back to the second part of the lecture series on mollusks. In this video here, we're going to be studying the physiology and body symptoms within exemplars of mollusks, including the bivalves and cephalopods. So jumping right into the systems here, we note the tongue, or most mollusks, is known as a radula that is shaped like a chisel that carpenters use. So the top right here, you can see the micrograph of the radula, shaped very much like a chisel. On the bottom right here, we can see a carpenter using a chisel as it scrapes wood grains away. And so they'll use this tongue as essentially tiny rows as for scraping. So those that are scavengers will, since they're just kind of scrape their food, and same for predators. But again, not all mollusks have a radula. Some of those, such as bivalves, are filter feeders, so they'll use their gills to sift food. Speaking of gills, the gills in aquatic species are used for respiration, so the diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide in and out of the organism cells. But in land mollusks, they had to have some type of adaptation that would allow them to still pull oxygen and carbon dioxide in and out of the air, just like we do. One of those adaptations is so the mantle cavity, so the space between the shell and the visceral mass, the internal organs, is lined with blood vessels. And these have to be kept moist, usually with some type of mucousy substance. Therefore, oxygen and carbon dioxide diffuse in and out of. And it's the same adaptation that we have in our cells, in our lungs, is that, again, if you've ever been sick or whatever, and you're coughing up more phlegm there, that our lungs have to be moist and allow for the diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide in and out of the cell. So the anatomy here, so again, this is a little bit of an oversimplification of the mollusk, the clam here. So the gill literally goes across laterally from right to left and fills this entire space. This artistic representation only has just a portion of it showing here, but the gill takes up the whole space, again, to increase the surface area, to increase the ability of the clam or the mussel to extract oxygen from the water, and to remove or help their aid in the respiration as they breathe. So the circulatory system, slow-moving species have what's known as an open circulatory system. We noted this in the first video as well, and that the blood is not always contained within the blood vessels. So basically, the heart will pump. Blood will go through the artery there, and then it's going to collect in these open spaces called sinuses, where the blood will then kind of work through these tissues and the sinus cavities to allow for the oxygen and carbon dioxide to diffuse in and out of. And the faster moving species like the cephalopods, such as squid and octopuses, have a closed circulatory system just like us. And in that, they're much more advanced and much more readily available to not only move more quickly, but also travel much larger distances at a time because of the advantages that the closed circulatory system provides. The excretory system, again, they have a complete digestive system, and their solid waste is expelled through the anus, with the metabolic waste, so the ammonia, the nitric oxides and things like that, are excreted by nephridia, which is a simple kidney-like organ that we've looked at a few times in other structures, such as the annelids, the nematodes. I know the platyhelminthes had a protonephridia, but it's essentially the same concept, where the nephridia is going to remove waste and excrete their metabolic waste, so essentially secrete the urine out of the skin. So again, here's an nephridia here, very characteristic of a tubule shape, and it's going to expel their metabolic waste outside their pores there. So the nervous system varies tremendously among mollusks here. So some are very, very simple, like in our bivalves, and some of the earlier mollusks, where it's just a couple of ganglia and a nerve cord, very much like some of the earlier worms that we studied, like the planarians. But some of the advanced ones have developed highly centralized brains with different portions of the brain responsible for different parts of functions, just like in our brains. So check out one of Hank's videos here as we transition to learn about how octopus and cephalopods can learn. And it's probably going to be a commercial.
Hosting a dinner party for your friends can be tough. So here's the thing. No one's going to know it's store-bought. Just you. So just put on something pretty.
Did you hear about the octopus that slipped out of its tank into a drain pipe and made a break for the sea? Or what about the cephalopod that figured out how to open those child-proof pill bottles? Which, let's be honest, certain adult humans have a hard time doing sometimes. It's fair to say that octopuses are smart, but when we talk about the intelligence of other animals, we tend to fall into the trap of comparing them to humans, testing for everything from the size of their brains to qualities like emotions or learning abilities. But octopuses are very different from people. I don't know if you've noticed. In the evolutionary tree, they are a long way off from us, and they're probably way more complex than we might realize or understand. So your brain is in your head, and so are the brains of other animals that we consider intelligent, like dogs and dolphins and chimps and crows. Octopuses have central brains in their heads as well, and we have some anatomical similarities. For example, their brains generate similar electrical patterns as vertebrates, and they seem to have specialized brain areas for things like learning and memory storage. They also seem to have a dominant or preferred eye, which is an example of lateralization, similar to the way that people are right or left-handed. But the weird thing is, about 2/3 of their neurons are in their arms. Each arm literally has a mind of its own to do its own problem solving and act independently, while the other arms are doing something completely different. In a 2013 research study, scientists isolated arms from dead octopuses in order to test those neural responses. And they found that the isolated arms recoil from being pinched or from touching tap water or acetic acid. This suggests that they might have some kind of nociceptors, or special neurons that sense danger and pain, like ones that make us pull our hand back from touching a hot stove. But unlike in humans, their arms can respond to these kinds of stimuli without being attached to a central brain. Other experiments have found that severed arms wiggle around and even grab onto food. So anatomically, octopuses are some pretty cool invertebrates. But what about their behavior? Octopuses have been observed using tools, like picking up 2 coconut halves to use as a mobile home, and manipulating objects in a way that looks a lot like playing. One 1993 study published in the Journal of Comparative Psychology even suggested that octopuses seem to display distinct personalities, reacting to food and threats in individual but consistent ways. One octopus might be consistently curious and daring, while another is careful and shy. Another study in 2001 seemed to show that young octopuses change their behavior over the course of weeks, becoming more alert to danger and learning from their environment. So octopuses do seem to have some sort of advanced cognition, learning and changing their behaviors over time. Even though we might see a lot of ourselves in the behavior of octopuses, we certainly didn't get there on the same path. Our vertebrate evolutionary branch split from the mollusks about 1.2 billion years ago, so human and octopus intelligence evolved completely separately. Scientists have a lot of different theories to try and explain how humans evolved intelligence, and one of them relates to our social lifestyle. Basically, forming long-lasting relationships could have meant better survival. But octopuses don't have that specific evolutionary pressure. They only live for a couple of years and are almost always alone. So how do these creatures evolve their intelligence and central brain while other mollusks, like oysters, didn't? Well, it might have something to do with the most obvious thing that separates an octopus from an oyster: the shell. At some point in their evolution, the octopus's ancestors probably traded the safety of a shell for freedom. Suddenly, they could move around and forage for food using a variety of hunting skills. So they also had to worry about becoming dinner, which led to all kinds of strategies to avoid being eaten, like hiding, camouflage, tool use, and speed. And all that self-preservation requires some sort of intelligence. The smarter octopuses would have had a better chance of survival. Octopuses might not look like us, move like us, live like us, or probably even think like us, but they have somehow evolved intelligence in ways we're only beginning to understand. Thank you for watching this episode of SciShow, which was brought to you by our patrons on Patreon. If you would like to help support this show so you can learn more.
Thank you. So again, very, very clear there. Again, an interesting species and in class for sure, the cephalopods, what they're learning. So again, if you're in a YouTube mood there's lots of videos of octopus opening jars to get to minnows, or getting out of jars, picking locks. There's been octopuses learning simulations and games, figure out how long they can retain memory. Lots of work has been done in this realm of brain development, actual learning, which I think is just absolutely fascinating. So again, here's a very more simplistic mollusk in the brain development aspect in this snail. So beautiful picture here of a snail's brain. So you can see here highlighted there in yellow is the ganglia, the nerve cell, the neuron, and then even more impressively is the nerve in its actual cell. So remarkable picture there showing a snail's brain and how it's functioned. And again, you can actually already begin to see kind of a two hemispheres brain coming together with some lower brain stems. Again, if you're familiar with the human brain. So reproduction there, as we'll get to talk a little bit more in the cephalopods and mollusks, are again, they're separate sexes. And so their gonads are going to be located in that visceral mass. And again, remember, visceral mass just means the essentially the bag or the structures within that house the internal organs. So essentially, all of this here is the visceral mass. Okay, and so again, they are separate sections, which means they are dioecious. So that's just a vocab word there, and that their larval stage is free swimming. So not all mollusks as adults are free swimming, such as a lot of mussels and oysters and clams. Kind of just once they land there, they're there. But their free swimming stage is called a trochophore, which an artistic representation here. I'm not going to ask you anything about the anatomy of a trochophore. Just hopefully that you realize the larval stage, as we talked about the life cycles of all these animals, the larval stage is called the trochophore. So historically, at least in my training, that we've really focused on 4 major classes of mollusks. After doing some research and some digging, there are actually more classes of mollusks in recent phylogenetic evidence has come to pass through DNA testing as such. As you can kind of see here, some very early ones there with the look more like worms, so like their ancestral kin, the annelids, the segmented worms. Polyplacophora are the chitons, which you can kind of see here. I'll change it to a laser pointer. Polyplacophora there is the ancestor to the traditional mollusks that most study, so the gastropods, the snails and slugs, the cephalopods, the octopuses, squid, and cuttlefish. And then we look at Bivalves here. So you'll notice the gastropods and cephalopods share a more recent common ancestor than with bivalves, which no surprise. Again, look, given the foot and the complexity, especially within the brain development and some of the digestive system and such. But again, all of these little hyphens or these little words, remember those are synapomorphies, are specific traits that characterize everything moving there within. So just so you can help remember that and read that. So we're going to look specifically at just 3 of the major classes, the first being gastropoda. So gastro means stomach, so think again GI tract, gastrointestinal. Podus meaning foot, so you go to the podiatrist, right, for your feet. Gastropods, the largest of the mollusk class, so these are going to be, again, incredibly over 70,000 species of snails and slugs, but also some marine gastropods, including sea slugs, sea butterflies, and such. So again, not only on terrestrial, but also in marine and in freshwater environments, has gastropods been able to find specific niches, depending on what side of the pond you're on, to develop. So pretty interesting guys here. Their feeding habits, again, these do have a radula. So I found a picture here on the internet of some type of slug, I believe, with the picture of the radula there, so opening the mouth, and it's just scraping off the algae. Pretty remarkable picture, if you ask me. Some of the scavengers, so again, they'll feed off dead organisms, while others are carnivores, so they will feed on live prey that they have captured, and they'll actually drill that chisel-like radula, that tongue, into their prey. So another major class is bivalves, which have 2 shells. Again, bi meaning 2. And these include mussels, clams, and scallops, oysters, and most of these are sessile, and they're just filter feeders. So most of your bivalves do not have a radula. I know on earlier the anatomy that we looked at of the bivalve, they had a radula for the mouth. It's really an oversimplification because, again, they do not really have a mouth at all. They have these little labial palps that kind of extend out of their mouth, and that's how they can kind of create these little microcurrents to kind of help filter feed as they pull things in. So pretty neat. Laterally, again, these bivalves are compressed with the help of these adductor muscles. As these contract, these will close very, 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 very tightly, and it's very difficult for an organism to for like starfishes and other type of mollusks like your squid and octopus to pry open. In large part because you have two large muscles on the anterior and the posterior end. On the anterior, so the way you can tell a clam or a mollusk or any type of bivalve, which is anterior, which is posterior, is if you set the mollusk on a flat surface, and you will notice that mollusk, that bivalve, will lean one way or the other. If it leans, whichever way is leaning downward, and it's more closely to the surface, that is the anterior end. So that's the head. And the posterior end is sticking up. And so the anterior end is typically going to have the foot located there and most of your visceral mass organs there, with the posterior end going to house the two siphons, the excurrent and the incurrent. All of these are held together, the closing of it, by this hinge ligament. Right there. So if you actually take the mollusk and you pry it apart, you'll see a pretty remarkable little hinge joint there, which is really nice. The umbo is the oldest part of the shell, and you can actually tell how old a clam or oyster is based off the number of rings it has, just like in a tree, which, and again, it's kind of neat to think about. So there are two different siphons and a bivalve. You have an incurrent, excurrent, and these are used for gas exchange. So they can pull in fresh water, run it through their gills. Their gills will extract the gas, the oxygen, and remove the carbon dioxide. They have some filter feed as well, and by jet propulsion. So there are some like scallops that can sit there, and we'll show you a video. They'll sit there and move their hinge joints and expel with the movement of taking water in, expelling water. They can actually kind of move through the water. It's kind of neat to see. So these bivalves will move around by extending their muscular foot between their shells, and some, like I said before, can actually move by their hinge joints. So let me open up this channel here and watch this little short clip. Really neat. Diver here, touching a scallop. It's a queen scallop. So again, while these aren't the scallops you'll find in homosassa, it's a very similar concept there, and you go to fish them out, and they'll begin to try to swim away as you kind of snorkel and pick them up. So if you ever get a chance to do that, I highly recommend. It's a lot of fun. All right, so unlike the other mollusks, bivalves have a coelom. Again, a coelom just means a body cavity. Right, that body cavity is typically located just around the heart, so that's like a pericardial region, and it's an open circulatory system. So again, when you dissect this, it's going to be on the dorsal side. The coelom is going to be very translucent, so it's going to be almost see-through, very thin, and through that thin coelom there, that thin pericardial cavity, you're going to be able to see a grayish, brownish looking, looks like almost like a little string. That is actually the heart. And so the heart will pump, send blood throughout the body there. But again, you'll notice that there's no connecting tissue. So there's sinuses all throughout the visceral mass, where this blood will just kind of sit there and diffuse in and out as it needs. It's kind of a neat thing. Again, they're going to breathe through their gills and filter feed. So this PowerPoint or this slide here shows the movement of water. So water goes in the incurrent, goes across the gills, and then essentially it's going to go out. The excurrent is going to be the ones, not only just water that blew in, but also any metabolic waste and carbon dioxide. So scallops, bivalves do have small blue eyes. Lots of scallops have these little blue eyes. They're really pretty little things, with each eye having its own cornea, its own lens, its own retina, and even pigmented layer. Again, so that's that blue color. And so these little eyes have been able to see some light and dark, but also a little bit of movement, which is how they can kind of sense when you're about to reach for them and grab them. All right, moving to our last major class is the cephalopods. And so again, podias meaning foot, and this in K-field meaning head. And so their head is actually their foot, which is kind of weird to think about. So the tentacles and arms and eyes and beak, all this is actually their foot. The mantle is inside, with the nautilus, you can see the mantle here, the shell. But in the cuttlefish, cuttlefish and the octopus and the squid, the mantle or the pin is inside, which is pretty neat. Cuttlefish, squid, nautilus, they're all exemplars. And if you ever get a chance to dissect one of these, which you showed in my class, is that when you move apart the tentacles and the arms and you open up, there's a buccal cavity, and inside it is their beak. And this beak looks just like a bird's beak, and it's very, very hard structure. And these things, they speak here as incredible force. They're able to help pry and get into things such as bivalves, which are very difficult to open. So cuttlefish also and octopus and squid have this incredible ability to camouflage, in part because of the chromatophores that we talked about. So you remember from the first video here, the chromatophores have the ability to contract, and as they contract or expand, their color can change. So again, this is just a water balloon with food coloring in it, and as I contract, the light is changing directions there, and it's pulling the blues in the blue food coloring. So you can imagine if I have cells with reds and yellows, blues, greens, and browns, and I manipulate the shape of these cells, the color that these can change. So check this out. This is beyond incredible to me. The armed forces wish they had the ability to camouflage as well. Check it out.
We all think of the chameleon as sort of the king or queen of color change, but that's not true. A cephalopod can show many more patterns and can show them instantaneously. An octopus can be so camouflaged you literally cannot see it. So every place they go, they are morphing into something that looks a lot like that environment.
Stop it right there for just a second. If you think about this, why would an octopus or a cephalopod need this type of ability to morph and camouflage into the body? What does camouflaging do for an organism? So in essence, camouflaging is just an ability, obviously, to surround it in its environment, but the question is why? Well, the whole purpose of life, biologically speaking, is just to survive and reproduce. And so you heard from Hank's video that these guys don't live all that long. And so if I'm able to camouflage and manipulate my chromatophores to change colors and blend most closely in my environment, I have a better opportunity of evading predation. And if I evade predation, I have a better chance of reaching sexual maturity. If I have a better chance of reaching sexual maturity, I have hopefully a better chance of finding a mate and passing on my offspring. And so, in essence, the cephalopods had the best ability to manipulate the chromatophores, more coloration, better control, better nervous system to respond and to think and to figure out these problems. Then the more likely I am to survive. And those genes of better chromatophores, better cell control, were then passed on to the offsprings, and we have what we have today. So check this last part out. It is just unbelievable.
So
Where is that octopus?
the scene. You've got a rock with algae all over it. There appears to be nothing there except a swimming fish
Do
going
you see
by.
it?
Okay, so take a look here and just watch for a moment.
Gets me every time.
There it is. whoa. Isn't that amazing? This animal was completely camouflaged on that rock, and suddenly it was there.
That's amazing. Absolutely amazing. So again, our armed forces wishes we could have camouflage as well as our cephalopods. So again, the cephalopod's shell, its mantle, is actually inside its inside its head region, right? So what you'll see right here, I'll switch it to a laser pointer again. This laser pointer move here is actually the pin. So that's actually the shell, or what is left, a remnant of the shell of other bivalves like the squid and clam. So, they can swim by expelling water from their mantle cavity and through that ventral funnel or siphon. So that's also where ink can be expelled as well. But they have the most complex eyes of any, or one of the most complex eyes of definitely of early life. And this is old life in regards to evolutionary history. So again, every eye has a cornea, lens, its own chamber, a retina, as you can see here. And this is remarkably close to the eyes that the mammals have as well. So again, the evolution of the adaptation of eyes and complex eyes has developed and been lost several times over evolutionary history, which in itself is just crazy to think about. So again, they have one of the largest invertebrate brains. And so again, as you heard Hank say there in the video earlier, is that not only are they that their brain is specialized with different regions for different functions for in that area, but also that every tentacle has these receptors that are able to integrate and figure out the external environment. So that way they're able to independently search for food, figure out, what the environment looks like, what it feels like, what's light, what's dark, these types of things, all independently. It'd just be crazy to think about a piano player that had this type of ability, that every finger, every digit that we had could manipulate the environment in that same way. It'd be a remarkable adaptation. Again, these do have closed circulatory systems. Again, they are much more efficient in managing and their energy reserves and getting energy to their muscles. We talked about the chromatophores again, that changing, that constricting or expanding their pigment cells, allowing them to blend into their background. And also, many of them have this ink sac, to which helps them to evade predators. Now, I recently learned that the ink sac is made, or the ink essentially is made of a specific type of amino acid, and most predators find this amino acid's aroma or presence very appetizing, so they stick around the inky substance. They want that essentially that smell. But not only does it smell good, it's also very sticky. And when that, say, a shark or whatever runs into that ink, the ink substance will basically gum up the nostrils of the shark momentarily, and now the shark loses scent or loses track of where that squid went with his nose. Now, it may see it visually, but the nose aspect, or through the olfactory senses, are lost, which is just remarkable. I say that a lot. It's okay. Animals are cool. So the reproduction or especially for cephalopods, is just beyond strange. So their sexes again are separate, so they're dioecious, and with their eggs hatching directly, or their juveniles hatching directly from eggs. So there's no free swimming larvae. So the trochophore stage isn't really here, to my knowledge. And what they have is the males are oftentimes smaller, and some species the males are much smaller than the females. When I click on the Stranger Things link here in a second, you'll see that. But very stereotypically of animal life, the female is much larger Mammals are a little weird where the males are larger, but most of animal life, females are larger. And what this male will do is he will basically reach inside himself, which in itself is weird, and grab a spermatophore, which is essentially like a little bitty egg sac, if you will. Not really an egg, obviously, because it's a male, but essentially a sac of sperm. And then he would inject this, or basically stick this into the female's genital cavity. Whoa. Lots of these guys will then detach that arm. So just basically, as soon as I do it, boom, detach mine, and I'm gone, which in itself is a interesting technique, to think the least. So anyway, check this little Stranger Things clip out, and we'll reconvene in just a few minutes here.
Next time you do this, you could be doing this. How?
Thanks, Ollie. And nothing makes for a great segue quite like detachable penises. The Argonaut octopus's penis breaks off during the mating process and stays with the female, and like its arms, it grows back. To inseminate the female, the male will either inject his spermatophores directly into the tube that the female uses to breathe, or he'll just hand them to her, which the females always accept with one of their right arms. Scientists still don't know why this happens. After this, the males typically wander off to die. Oh, that's sad. The female will then lay her some odd 400,000 eggs. She'll stop eating while protecting them, and when they finally hatch, her body commits cellular suicide. Contrary to historical Japanese depictions, octopus sex is not a fun time. Female Argonaut octopuses are 600 times larger than the males. The males being only 2 centimeters or 3/4 of an inch long. You can imagine why he'd want to detach his penis and make a speedy getaway. Blanket octopuses are also incredibly sexually dimorphic, but that's not what's cool about them. Remember the Portuguese man-o-war? The colonial organism with the deadly venom? Well, blanket octopuses are immune to their poison, so they hunt them down, rip off their tentacles, and wield them as weapons when hunting prey. Finally, I'll leave you with this newly identified octopus, which is so cute, scientists are considering naming it Adorabilis. What animal should I check out next?
Yeah, so the last little bit was just free information. That's just, again, the cephalopods are just crazy. Love these guys here. So anyway, that concludes our lecture series on mollusks. So again, they have part 1, which is characteristics and anatomy, and this video here is the systems and the physiology. So until next time, I'll see you then.